What if I told you that one of our greatest responsibilities as facilitators wasn't to explain content, but it was to foster human connection? That our responsibility to connect with participants and to get participants to connect with each other is one of the most important roles that we play. And what if I were to tell you that one of the greatest lessons that I learned about fostering human connection hasn't come over the last couple of years, but it actually occurred in the summer of 1994. Now, I'm going to share with you two experiences from my summer that help illuminate this issue. So first, what you have to understand a little bit about me is that I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. And growing up in Las Vegas, Nevada, especially in the summer, is one of the most wretched experiences known to man. Right? It's 175 degrees outside. People are melting. You don't ever want to go outside because your shoes are melting to the sidewalk or something like that. But one of the struggles with being a teenager at that time is you just don't want to go outside. So you try to buy your time being indoors. Well, as luck should have it, as you're indoors on a number of different occasions, you get bored and you watch TV. Well, I'm actually a little ashamed to admit this, but as I watched TV on a number of occasions, I was victim to and totally enthralled with back-to-back episodes of The Love Connection. Don't act like you guys didn't watch that show, by the way. You know you did. Okay. Now, with The Love Connection, this was a really interesting show because it was hosted by the always affable Chuck Woolery, right? What an amazing man. Okay. Now, Chuck, interestingly enough, as he led this show, he would have participants come on, and they would have 80s guys try to date 80s girls, and they would make mutant 80s children. But in all seriousness, let's talk about some of the dynamics of this show. Because what Chuck did is he had just an individual who was willing to be on the show. They watched a video reel of different people that they may be interested in. They learned small little facts about these individuals, chose someone that they'd like to go out with, and they went out on a date. An opportunity was provided for them to get to know each other just a little bit better over the evening, and on the next episode of the show, we would hear a recap of how the date went and if they wanted to date any further. My question to you is, what if, as facilitators, rather than looking at Chuck Woolery as just some kind of pop 80s icon, what if we looked at him actually as a genius? What if we looked at him as someone who could offer us a lot of lessons about human connection for us in our classrooms? Now let's take a step back because I said we had two experiences we were going to learn from. My second experience kind of requires me to maybe overshare a little bit, but I guess I'll do that anyway. I had a problem when I was a teenager, especially in the summer of 1994. I didn't have a problem with drugs. It wasn't a problem with girls. My problem was with a substance, and that substance was milk. Yeah, I know this is awkward. I had a problem with milk, and it was a love-hate relationship, right? Like, I loved milk, it hated me, and it loved to hate me. Which, going to speaking probably like about the love connection, milk in the general area here didn't do very well with some of my attempts at a love connection. Anyway, as my family went through this research process of trying to help me figure out how to start digesting milk better, I came across this really interesting bacteria that's actually extremely popular today, and that is the bacteria of Lactobacillus acidophilus, which we call probiotics today. But I had to take copious amounts of Lactobacillus acidophilus, like an insane amount of it. So in order to take an insane amount of it, I guess it's kind of important to understand how it grows. Okay, so this brings up how bacteria is grown. Bacteria is grown under very specific and intentional conditions. First and foremost, for bacteria to grow, it has to be in a substance called agar. Now, agar is kind of like Bill Cosby's Jell-O for bacteria, right? They just love to eat it. On top of being within agar, it has to have the right temperature. You have to have the right humidity, and it has to be placed in the right sort of light conditions that promote growth. So what if we looked at the growth of bacteria the same way we do in how we're fostering human connections within our classrooms? So I guess the big idea here is so what? Right? So what? These are two really great stories, but what does that have to do with you? What if you took these two examples of Chuck Woolery with fostering human connections within some stupid 80s game show and the scientific methods behind growing bacteria, and we tried to foster better human connections within our classroom? What if you looked at your classroom as an opportunity for you to provide optimal conditions with which you connected with participants and how they connected with each other? Because breaking down those barriers offers a wonderful opportunity for them to actually get what we're trying to teach them and for them to apply what we're trying to teach them. Now, over my research of this topic, because I've been fairly interested in this topic for a number of years, I've come across a lot of research, a lot of studies, but I think there are only a number of studies that actually really transfer into the classroom. So we're going to cover 4 of them today. And I've borrowed the names of these from a book that I think does a really wonderful job in explaining them in just a pithy fashion. And that's from a book called Click by Ori and Ram Brafman. So once again, what if you accelerated the speed and likelihood of the human connections that happen in your classroom? So let's go over these four conditions. The first condition that you see here is vulnerability. Vulnerability essentially says, I'm sharing personal information with you, and you're hearing personal information and sharing it back with me. And the process of interchanging that personal information invites us to get to know someone a little bit better. It's as if we're both castles with drawbridges. I become vulnerable and I let down my drawbridge. You become vulnerable and let down your drawbridge. And now we're open. Now, quite frankly, when we look at vulnerability, we think of it in a negative connotation. I'm vulnerable to attack. Someone might know too much information about me that they could use against me. But what if we looked at vulnerability in a positive way? That yes, I'm open, but now I'm open to growth. I'm open to knowing more about you. I'm open to you knowing more about me. Now, as a facilitator, I guess one of the questions is, what are some of the things that you're doing to be more vulnerable to your class? Are you sharing personal stories about yourself? Quite often, we're a little hesitant to share too personal a story. We want to keep with organizational initiative stories. But what's wrong with sharing a couple of personal stories about your use of the skills, maybe in a good way or a bad way? And what are some of the things that you're doing to promote vulnerability amongst your participants, inviting them to share personal information with each other? Let's go on to the second point. The next condition for human connection comes through proximity. Now, proximity, this sounds really similar, right, to our influencer concept of distance, and it is to a certain extent. Proximity essentially says, I am more likely to get to know you and to connect with you if we're just flat out closer to each other. Now, this doesn't mean that our participants need to sit shoulder to shoulder all day through in class. But proximity essentially says, if I'm closer to you, I am more likely to talk to you. And not about deep stuff, just about idle chatter. That me and you just having idle chatter about nothing is really promotional to our connecting human to human, person to person. So, as a facilitator, what are some of the things that you may be doing to promote proximity? Do you greet and get to know folks as they come into your class? Do you walk the room as you talk to them and try to get an opportunity just to engage in idle chatter? What are some of the things that you're doing to promote proximity amongst your participants as we're trying to get our participants to change table groups at a regular basis so that they engage in idle chatter with more people within the class? I have to say that in terms of my relationships at Vital Smarts, proximity has served one of the greatest blessings in my life to gain some very powerful friendships with people that I work with, just by officing next to them and engaging in some of the most informational chats that I've had over the last recent years. Point number 3, that is this concept of similarity, that I am more likely to connect with you if I see a piece of me in you, and if you see a piece of yourself in me. Now, similarity sometimes I think we take too far. And the element of this becoming something to help for human connection is meant for us to help people see that there's something even small that they have inside of themselves that they see in us. Let me give you an example. Research shows, for instance, that we are more likely to put away judgment against someone else even if they just share the same name as us. I meet another David, and I'm more likely to be interested in getting to know them for an extra 2 minutes beyond what I would have if their name had been John. No offense to Johns in the room, but. So what are some of the things that you may be doing as a facilitator to promote similarity between you and some of your participants? Do you get to know them a little bit better so they can have an understanding of some of the things that you like and dislike? Do you both like hockey? Do you enjoy going walks with your taking walks with your dog in the park? Do you like a similar book that they do? What are some of the things that you may be doing to promote similarity between your participants? Maybe putting a little idea card of questions that they can ask each other to find similarities. As you're meeting people as they come in and you find that one individual has a problem with an organizational issue and we find that someone else on the other end of the room has the same problem, are you connecting those people together so that they can find that they share similarity? Now let's go on to the last point. The last point is a sense of team. And this is actually extremely powerful, yet fairly difficult to translate into the classroom. A sense of team, when we're talking about an environment that fosters human connection, is essentially that the group of us are against the world. It's me and you working against a common foe, or we're trying to work together to achieve a common goal. Now, in concept, that sounds all nice, but when we look at a class, once again, that's a little tough to try to replicate. Amongst participants, I think one of the quicker or more easily grasped elements of team would be putting our participants together and giving them a task to accomplish so that they could get a prize at the end of class. Okay, and that's all fine and well. But what about us with our participants? How could we promote a sense of team with our participants? I think one of the greater things that we can do with them in order to connect with them on a human level is to actually decide how are we in this class going to overcome organizational initiative, a problem that you notice that is going on within this organization. And let's work together over the next number of days or a next number of sessions to actually solve that problem, that we can overcome this adversity together. And with that sense of togetherness, that also promotes human connection. I'll say about this issue of a sense of team. Some of my most deeply held friendships and people I care about the most have been those whom I have seen as being a team member. And the opportunity that I've had to be in the quote-unquote foxhole with them, working towards a common goal, has been empowering for me. And maybe that's something that we could translate within our classrooms. So my question to you is the question of what if? What if proximity, vulnerability, similarity, and a sense of team were on your side? What if you looked at your class not as a class, but as a game show? What if you looked at your class like a petri dish in which the right conditions have to be in play in order for human connection to be fostered, to be grown? What if you connected with participants faster so that the barriers to their learning were put away? What if the deepening lessons that we share within any of the different courses that we teach were to get down to their heart quicker and they believed that could really make a difference? What if Chuck Woolery really were a genius? Thank you.